Welcome back. This is Leslie Powers, your host for Alive and Thriving. And today I'll be sharing with you my sixth installment of my foundational series, Alive and Thriving. Let's share my screen and get going here. Alive and Thriving, awaken your true human potential by taking responsibility for your personal psychology, lifestyle choices, and holistic health. Claim your sovereign freedom and free your soul as you are guided by natural law and right moral action. I'm going to skip ahead here. This is the last slide from video 5, the great work. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. So this is a quote by Carl Jung, and I am inviting you to do the unpopular thing of looking at the darkness within yourself and within the world in order to transmute it and rise above it. And this will ultimately result in improving the condition of humanity and making us all more free. So we need to look into the dark places of ourselves and our world. The secret of freedom lies in educating people, whereas the secret of tyranny is in keeping them ignorant. A quote by Maximilien Robespierre. And ladies and gentlemen, the world we are living in is tyranny. The dark places exist within ourselves. This is where we need to do our personal self-reflection, our shadow work and trauma processing. The dark places exist in our relationships, where we need to face the real problems, the core issues, the roots of the problem, and to develop our emotional intelligence and invest in personal and relationship growth. The dark places exist in the world where we need to be willing to see what is really happening, to study the strategies of the dark occultists and their methods of mind control. We most definitely need to get to the root of things in order to heal from the core. And that's what my work is all about, is to not stay on the surface level of appearances, but to dig deep into the root. So part 6 of Alive and Thriving, we're going to talk about mind control, problem, reaction, solution dynamics, taking personal responsibility, the qualities of determination and persistence in our characters, course correction when we stray off course, breaking down the past through self-inquiry, understanding the triune brain and how this impacts our lives and how we are being manipulated, how we are divided within and experience cognitive dissonance, the influences in our lives, the wheel of power and control, and the equality wheel. What do equal relationships look like? Mind control strategies are methods of manipulation. And this is a list that comes from Mark Passio's work, where I highly recommend you visit, on what on earth is happening. He has a website of that name, and he has podcasts, more than 200 of them. Start with number 1, move through progressively so that you get this tapestry of information from the bird's eye view, from the cosmic view, where you can see the whole picture. So I will just list the names of these methods of manipulation. Obfuscation, which is obscuring what's going on. Worldview poisoning. Primal fears that are being exploited. Divide and conquer. Indoctrination. Controlled opposition. The financial system. Controlling of the mass media. The corruption of our food, medicine, and air, manipulating time, the illusion of time, the DHR factor, which stands for denial, harassment, and ridicule of people who dare speak out against the mainstream messaging, the manipulation of religion, which is another way of binding or holding back our consciousness. Subversive symbolism, process of chaos sorcery, and the use of problem, reaction, solution. Brainwashing, also known as mind control, menticide, or killing the mind, coercive persuasion, thought control, thought reform, and re-education. These are synonyms that are I found in Wikipedia. Brainwashing is the concept that the human mind can be altered or controlled by certain psychological techniques. Brainwashing is said to reduce its subject's ability to think critically or independently, to allow the introduction of new, unwanted thoughts and ideas into their minds, as well as to change their attitudes, values, and beliefs. Philip Zimbardo defined mind control by religious cults as the process by which individual or collective freedom of choice and action is compromised by agents or agencies that modify or distort perception, motivation, affect, cognition, or behavioral outcomes. And he suggested that any human being is susceptible to such manipulation. And that means all of us. That means you. That means me. The way out of this external control comes from developing our awareness, increasing our consciousness of these techniques, and to be able to look and see how they're being used in our own lives, how they are affecting us. Here's an example of using the Hegelian dialectic, the abuse, the manipulation of a dialectic, which we could define as a dispute or debate intended to resolve differences between two views, rather than to establish one as true. A dialectic is the act of communication, the act of conversation, to find a synthesis between what appears to be opposing viewpoints, to reach a synthesis of the perspectives through a thoughtful process of questions and answers with open-minded consideration. It is the art of conversation to change together. Dialectics can be swayed, however, away from achieving synthesis and instead creating more conflict, opposition, and tension by heightening the polarization of people. This leaves an opening for a contrived solution by an external authority. This brings us to the Hegelian dialectic, which is an artificial manipulation of rivalries through manipulating people to take sides chosen for them, pitting people against each other and creating confusion and chaos. The orchestrators then step in with a contrived solution, usually executed through the arms of government, and which inevitably results in a reduction of freedom or an increase in tyranny. So a Hegelian dialectic consists of three dialectical stages of development: a thesis, giving rise to its reaction; an antithesis, which contradicts or negates the thesis; and the tension between the two being resolved by means of a synthesis. So we have a school shooting that happens. A thesis is, this is terrible, guns are rampant, they're free in the streets, anybody can get them, the crazy people, the terrorists can get the guns, and people create a reaction, right? And then the antithesis, which says, no, we must have freedom to have our guns, and all people should have guns. And so then the big daddy government comes in to somehow mediate between the tension of these two extremes, which were set up perhaps through a contrived event, and they resolve it in a false synthesis with a solution that they've chosen, which could be regulations, gun control laws, right? So again, the synthetic solution to these conflicts cannot be introduced unless those being manipulated take a side that will advance the predetermined agenda. So there are many narcissists and psychopaths in the world, and many of them are at least influencing, if not running, the world arena. Now, this is unfortunate, yet it is true. I invite everyone again to visit the work of Mark Passio through his website, What on Earth is Happening, and listen to his podcasts. Also look at the Cult of the Medics documentary series by David Whitehead to gain a deeper understanding of what is going on in the world that affects us all. Also, please look at the work of Richard Grove and watch his podcast called Grand Theft World, where he keeps up and has really in-depth commentary on world events. And I also recommend Leah Boone's documentary called The Illuminati Meta Matrix. Psychopaths and narcissists are embedded in positions of power across the globe. They use a range of techniques to confuse and influence the average person who is not self-aware or willing to admit their own vulnerability to manipulation. So the problem reaction solution is a technique, the Hegelian dialectic, that can be seen operating throughout our history to move agendas forward, and those agendas belong to the narcissists and the psychopaths in the world arena, the people who have financial and power investments. There are other mind control games that narcissists use to manipulate you. Again, gaslighting, the use of denial, lying, misinformation, and contradiction to make you doubt your sanity, to doubt your memory and your perceptions and your sensory experiences. Projection involves criticizing others for the things that they do themselves. So I'm projecting on you something that I do. Guilt tripping, passive-aggressive way to remind someone of something bad they did in order to make them want to make up for it. Totally distracting from the very point that a person may be making to get them on the, feeling guilty. The silent treatment, ignoring messages, calls, or questions to make you feel uncertain and to make you start doubting yourself. Negative humor, making critical remarks disguised as sarcasm or humor to make you feel inferior or less secure. Pretend ignorance, playing dumb in order to get away with a behavior. Victimhood, designed to exploit someone's goodwill, create a guilty conscience to become a victim in order to get a benefit from another person who feels sorry for them. And then constant criticism, constantly marginalizing, ridiculing, and dismissing you to make you feel inferior and to make them feel superior. And then throwing a tantrum, raising their voice, using a lot of gestures, and sometimes even physical abuse to get whatever they want, using intimidation and fear-inducing behaviors. There's also soft mind control. Mind control is sometimes loosely defined as information control. Information is controlled typically through the media. This being one of the many accepted ways to define the term, should immediately raise questions of distrust towards our information sources. Since what we think is based on what we learn, manipulation of a mind or a nation of minds can be accomplished through control of information. With, though, control being a result of information control, many avid researchers of mind sciences simply label it soft mind control. This is an explanation made by Mark Phillips from Transformation of America. So imagine what happens to a young and suggestible psyche when information is combined with physical and emotional trauma. This becomes the next level up of trauma-based mind control. We are all programmed. Our beliefs, shoulds, and judgments, where do they come from? Social engineering through media, marketing, and advertising. There are deep psychological meanings that we unconsciously are affected by just from seeing these symbols. There's also family, parental, and spousal programming. There's the education system. Someone else's agenda is programming you, someone else's profit, someone else's benefit, someone else's power trip is represented in modern advertising. And the symbolism is both covert and overt. What are your circles of influence, and therefore of programming, in your lives? What beliefs and worldviews have you adopted from these influences? What beliefs about your own self have you taken on from them, from your family, your mother, your father, teachers, coaches, other mentors of your life, friends, workplace, community members, religion, political affiliation, government messaging, your region or subculture where you live? Do you live in a city, a suburb, the countryside, the mountains? Are you on grid or off? What is your ethnicity, your ancestry, your gender? What food do you eat? Do you eat processed foods, whole foods, organic, meat? Are you vegetarian, vegan? All of these influence you and your mind. So what are cult techniques? Think about how these techniques are incorporated in common institutions that we don't normally think of as cults, such as the military, the police, or a Catholic school, or even the public schools that your child may go to or that you went to. The use of isolation, the use of us versus them mentality, social separation, social alienation, the use of conformity, being the same, wearing uniforms, indoctrination through repetition. This includes rigorous schedules, drills, long hours, physical trauma, creating exhaustion, disrupting your sleep, feeding you a poor diet, and mental emotional trauma, verbal and psychological abuse, shocking scenarios, an atmosphere of fear. Perhaps you need to do a drill to protect you in case a school shooter comes, or you have an intruder in your school, or there's a nuclear bomb that's dropped. You know, you've got to do your drills. Don't be afraid, though. The only rules that should guide us come from somewhere else. And these are the natural law principles. And these come from nature, not government, not the school system. And they provide the roadmap to morality and freedom. Natural law is universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable. They are the conditions which govern the consequences of behaviors of beings with the capacity for understanding the difference between harmful and non-harmful behavior. The understanding of natural law is centered upon bringing our own conscience into alignment with objective morality. This means definitely knowing which behaviors are rights because they do not cause harm to other sentient beings, or which behaviors are wrongs because they do cause harm to other sentient beings. Natural law is sometimes called cosmic law, or universal law, or God's law, or spiritual law. Natural law suggests that human laws are derived from eternal and unchangeable principles found in nature. People can become aware of these laws by the use of reason. Examples of natural law include parents should care for their children. If you don't care for your children, then your children will incur harm. They will suffer. So we each alone are responsible for implementing natural law into our own lives. This involves increasing consciousness and managing our emotions and stress reactions. And if we don't take the personal responsibility for our lives and our choices related to the programming that is being imposed upon us, if we don't see it and analyze our choices and base them on natural law principles, then the result is slavery. If we allow people to operate from the claim of authority that they in nature do not actually have, If we let them do that, then we are giving away our rights, and we are part of the problem. We are part of the outcome of slavery. So how much freedom do you need to lose before you consider it slavery? What needs to happen before you are really disturbed by what's happening in the world and very seriously take charge of your own life decisions and detach and deprogram from the wrongdoings of this world? We need to take a serious look at the morality of institutions such as government, because the belief in authority legitimizes slavery. If we give up our power of choice to another person or group, we are enslaving ourselves mentally, if not also physically. Our mind and bodies are interconnected. We cannot leave our body and be alive mentally. Government in reality involves coercion and threat, which we've already established is a violation of our rights. Government condones physical violence. When we pay taxes, we are paying for people to die unnecessarily, for killing. Okay. Slavery conditions teach people not to think for themselves and makes them passive, turning to others to solve their problems. Slavery conditions, big or small, lead to a diminishment of our moral compass. Subtle slavery conditions include an external locus of control and a willful abdication of our free will and our right to self-defense. Slavery stops people from making choices in their own lives. A quote from Chris Jansen from endevil.life. What amount of coercion and threat against your body and freedom is not slavery? Is there any amount of coercion and threat against your body that is okay? How do you enslave yourself? By believing in an authority outside of natural law, or God, if you want to call natural law God. This includes becoming subservient to a government, a church, a teacher, a guru, a doctor, a minister, a spouse, or an employer. Believing in false left-right paradigms such as political parties or groups that create separation and competition, the illusion of separation. You enslave yourself by believing in religion, including government, scientism, money. Believing or fooling yourself by believing that the institutions of religion, banking, medicine, law enforcement, military, education, and just about every other societal institution exist to do what they claim they exist for, and that they are there for your benefit. That is false. If you are believing that and going along with that program, you're enslaving yourself, giving away your personal power and decision-making. Just to get by, just not to make waves. That's enslaving yourself. Operating from the fight, flight, or freeze complex of your mind-body system is a result of mind control and trauma. And when you are in that state, you are complicit. So healing our trauma, healing ourselves, and overcoming these embedded complex responses is really vital to reclaiming ourselves and our freedom. So take a moment and think, how do you enslave yourself with your own thoughts, your own beliefs, and your own actions? We're all in this big soup together. Very few people can say that they are not part of this enslavement process. Some quotes by Michael Tessarian about the ways we do not see. The symbolically illiterate man is less able to resist the propaganda of the hidden dictators who control the world. He is vulnerable and perpetually victimized by overlords who manipulate his beliefs and allegiances. As time goes by, he becomes completely dependent on his masters and will do and think whatever keeps him in subconscious rapport with them. If maintaining the status quo means loss of individuality, It is a sacrifice he makes. Modern man has just enough freedom to entrap himself, enough will to enslave himself, and enough understanding to choose ignorance. A powerful statement by Michael Tessarian. Sadly, true. Modern man's failure to attune to his inner voice ensures that he lives inauthentically. And he also says, which is important to remind ourselves, that each man is his own priest and each woman her own priestess, meaning that we are our own in authority. So to allow these conditions of slavery to go on in our lives unnoticed and unchallenged involves us having cognitive dissonance, which is the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change. So cognitive dissonance involves inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes. Our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are not in alignment. They're not in alignment with truth. You know, it's, for example, this little cartoon says, it's this little figure, and one side of his head is saying, animal cruelty is wrong. And the other side of his head is saying, but also so delicious. How do we carry both thoughts? What do we do with that? Our minds become compartmentalized, they become polarized, and we often just move forward, allowing it to be so, and be unconscious. So this is about bringing these inconsistencies to the conscious mind so that we can rationally and reasonably analyze those thoughts and make decisions about them that are coming from our own center. The heart of this series is your personal internal work. So bring yourself into alignment of thoughts, feelings, and actions. What do you think? How do you feel? What do you do? Are they consistent? Are they in agreement? Where these do not align is your personal work. It's your shadow work. So the keys to finding clarity: self-resource for self-knowledge. Slow down and step back to prepare yourself for self-inquiry. Question, what am I here to do? Breathe deeply and implement a variety of mindfulness and grounding practices. We want to keep our frontal lobes, our frontal cortex online. Look for patterns in yourself and your life. Notice the parts of yourself that you avoid, the aspects of your life you feel ashamed of or that cause you pain. What have you buried or hidden within you? What do you push aside and push down? Recognize that your emotions are indicators of something important, but they're not necessarily telling you the truth about a situation. Ask yourself, do I really want what I say I want? If I get what I say I want, will I be fulfilled? Will I really be happy? Notice the cognitive dissonance. Where are you out of alignment within? Identify and challenge your deeply embedded worldviews. Engage the trivium. Develop your intuitive awareness. Learn to trust yourself, your own perceptions, and your ability to discern, not on what you are being told to think. So question the mainstream narrative and think for yourself. Know your rights, do no harm, and take no shit. This involves a very high level of personal responsibility. We are the solution that we are looking for. And this picture depicts some of the steps, a version of how personal responsibility can bring us up the ladder through the development of self-control. We can experience greater freedom. We can base our life on values and principles, recognizing that we have choices and we are responsible for those choices and the outcomes that come from the choices. and we get lessons where we can develop wisdom, right? It's a process. And this process requires determination and persistence. So be undaunted. Don't give up. Find your inner strength. Find a reason and a why. Why is this so important? Bring it home. Be motivated. Select a course starting from wherever you are. Wherever you are, just start from there. Stop beating yourself up for being where you are, because the more information we get, the more knowledge we get, we can feel bad that we got ourselves into this mess. So move forward, accept it, and start going forward, activating your willpower and determining your own trajectory to the best of your ability within the soup that we're all swimming in here. So for most of us, this will involve some course correction, and we need to create a strategy to achieve our purpose of becoming aligned with natural law, with truth, to stop being participants in this system of slavery. First and foremost, we need to seek knowledge. We need to care about finding truth and asserting our rights while cultivating care for ourselves and others. Learning natural law as a guide to moral principles, and becoming a witness to our thoughts and emotions. From this witness state, we look for patterns in ourselves. We see patterns in our relationships with other people, and with the world itself. And from this place, we're looking and noticing the incongruencies. And this is where we need to be extra honest with ourselves, because it can bring up issues where we don't really want to see things, where we may realize we're living incongruent, but if we change it, then we have to make a pretty big sacrifice of some sort, whether it's a decrease of income or security in our housing, etc. Maybe a break of relationships. So as we're being honest with ourselves, we also need to be honest with the other people in our lives and develop effective communication skills. And all along the way, we're continually doing shadow work and processing the residue of past traumas and ongoing traumas, because this world is traumatizing. We are bombarded with so many things that overwhelm us. And this is part of the mind control strategy, is to create overwhelm and trauma and get us into our trauma responses, our reptile and animal brain, where we're not able to think critically. So we have to work very intentionally to ground ourselves, to bring ourselves to a state of calm where our frontal lobes are online, where we can think and observe and be honest. And this involves learning emotional regulation, to respond rather than react. We also need to cleanse and detoxify, to process and purge regularly, frequently, both physically through our diet, but also through our own, maybe taking purges from social media, from social contacts, getting away from our work influences. We need to slow down and be able to cleanse and purge and purify to some extent, because the waters get very muddy, and we have to let that dust settle so we can see things, see what's there. And when you have knowledge, take action and align yourself with the truth. You are a person with a history, working on making history. And what you do in your life becomes the history for the people in the future. And we have a choice, many, many opportunities to influence the history we make and the stories that will be told in response to our actions. So let's be very mindful and intentional and conscious of this. And another quote, being different and thinking different makes a person unforgettable. History does not remember the forgettable. It honors the unique minority the majority cannot forget. So How I interpret this is that we need to be willing to go against the grain, to separate ourselves from the herd when we discover an incongruency and a wrongdoing in the mainstream way of thinking, that we need to be willing to be different and to think differently than what we've been taught throughout our lives. And by doing so, we can have an impact on history. Our personal history includes the context of being in a family and the context of our ancestry. And there's memory in our cells. There's memory in our DNA. And part of our shadow work, our personal work, is to explore how our present day human self has been created by a myriad of influences within our family and ancestry. And our genetic memory, our soul memory, our blood memory, our codes. It's part of discovering our uniqueness. And we may have to clear out some things. We may have a lot of trauma embedded deep within our cellular memory that we can work on clearing. Breaking down your unresolved past. Current symptoms are our guide to what needs to be healed. They're clues to unresolved traumas derived from our past. Ozzy Osbourne, in his song Road to Nowhere, said, "The wreckage of my past keeps haunting me. It just won't leave me alone." So take note of your emotional overreactions, your fears, your avoidances. Notice what triggers you. Write a trauma timeline, including both big and little traumas, the chronic stressors and irritations, the kids that teased you in school, your self-consciousness about your weight because somebody called you fat, whatever it is. It may seem like a smaller thing, but those small things add up and they do make great impact on our psyche. Write a trauma timeline. Then notice periods of your history where you are missing memories. Notice what parts of your life you'd prefer to skip over. What behaviors do you end up regretting? What do you do instead, when you don't want to face something or do something or be reminded of something? What do you go do to distract yourself? What are your childhood wounds? What are your internalized self-defeating scripts? Write a list of emotional wounds that have occurred to you from birth to your present time. With each one, ask yourself, how do I feel about myself when I remember that experience? What emotions does it bring up? How does my body respond? Do I get a stomach ache? Do I get tension in my throat? What feelings and beliefs about yourself did those experiences promote? You may more than likely have some scripts that go like, I am helpless, I'm unimportant, I'm powerless, I'm not good enough, I'm invisible, I'm stupid, ugly, undesirable. You may not even be conscious that those scripts are operating inside you. But when we are getting triggered by an event, there's often an emotional shutdown or a fight or flight response. And ultimately, there is a negative cognition about ourselves connected to that is also connected to a trauma that happened in our life. And that may be something you remember or something you don't. So it can be tricky. In this little comic, these three people here, we have a couple, and then there's a woman looking in the mirror. One person in the couple says, "So what do you do?" And the lady in the purple dress says, "Oh no, I look so stupid. They must think I'm such an idiot." Right? We have had throughout our lives some insecurities that pop up when we're in situations, often social ones, where we start to have scripts in our head that are self-defeating. And other people don't see that in us, but we see it in ourselves. And it impacts how our level of confidence, it impacts how we behave. So what are yours? Your internalized, self-defeating scripts. What are the signs that we're triggered? Consciousness contracts as we fall into fight or flight. operating from our limbic system and brainstem. Rational thinking diminishes or ends. Compassion often diminishes or ends. We enter into a fight response or a flight response or a freeze response or possibly a fawn response where we become pliable and compliant to avoid further aggravation of our object of fear. We may not be able to stay within our window of emotional tolerance, our window of tolerance. This means that our moods, our reactions could fluctuate between hyperstimulation, anger, reactivity, and mania, or hypostimulation, depression, apathy, or chronic fatigue. We may experience dissociation, memory loss, or checking out. So here are some warning signs that past trauma is triggered. The desire to move to a low stimulating environment, seeking comfort in something from your childhood. That doesn't always mean that it's a healthy thing. Being unable to express your emotions, struggling to give or connect with another's needs, hyperventilation or shortness of breath, feeling generally unsafe. Are you triggered and dissociated or not? Some possible signs in your body: holding your breath, frequent sighing, an increased heart rate, sweating, muscle tightness, flushing of your skin, somatic pain, body pain, sleepiness, yawning, fatigue that hits you suddenly, irritation, irritability, frustration, distractibility, your mind wandering, dislike of a person who you're with, intellectualizing or talking too much. These are actually meant for clinicians, for therapists, to look at themselves to see, am I triggered by this person I'm talking to, by my own client, right? So we all need to be aware. The triune brain model is a simple way of looking at how our brains operate related to trauma. The frontal lobes or neocortex is unique to the human brain, just the thinking brain. And the limbic system with the amygdala is the animal brain. The amygdala is like a smoke detector of your brain. It's sensing to see if you're safe or not, if anything is showing up that the limbic system, the emotional brain, is identifying as a threat. And if it does sense something, then the amygdala starts ringing an alarm, triggering the brainstem or the reptile brain to activate your physiology, to help your heart rate increase, to shift where your blood is flowing so that you can fight, to release your bowels so that you're emptied out and, lighter on your feet and you can run faster. This natural brain nervous system dynamic operates unconsciously in our biology, and it can be both manipulated and managed. So again, the triune brain, the rational part of the brain involves logic and thinking. The mammalian part of the brain includes emotion, pleasure seeking, pain avoidance. And the reptile brain is activated for survival in response to fear. And then we have different functions of our right and left hemispheres. And this is up for some debate. And yet there still is clearly some differentiation in our functions. And for the sake of this presentation, I will talk about it as left and right brain lateralization. So the left brain functions include analytical thought, detail orientation in our perception, ordered sequencing, rational thought, verbal skills, cautiousness, planning, the use of math and science, logic, and is expressed through right field vision and right side motor skills. So this is actually my left hand, but for you, it looks like my right. It's whatever. My right. So my right hand and The right side of my body is connected to the left brain. My left side of my body is controlled by the right brain. And it is the center point, the corpus callosum, which integrates or synthesizes and allows the unified communication between the hemispheres. Trauma fragments the mind, and we become divided within. Humans are amazing and resilient beings. Our adaptability allows us to function through and despite extreme stressors. Our brain and nervous system responds to stress and trauma in such a way to allow us to keep functioning in one way or another, even when the nervous system is injured or sick. So we may not be functioning super great, but it's amazing how people can function despite their traumas. With chronic, prolonged, or extreme trauma episodes, such as chronic stress, our system responds by compartmentalizing itself. Trauma fragments the mind so that the trauma and stress do not overwhelm the individual so much that he or she cannot survive. Basic compartments include the survival functioning self and the traumatized self. The traumatized self can separate out into flight responses, fight responses, shutting down, anxiety, aggression. The survival functioning self includes those parts of you that manages your life, that can, get yourself out of bed in the morning and go to a job and be able to shut off all of your stress, your worries, to be able to complete your job. So it's helpful. There's a helpfulness to each of these compartments, and especially in its origin. But over time, those compartments can lead to a lack of integration within our own mind and in our own lives, and lead to that lack of congruence, that misalignment in our own behavior and our thoughts and feelings. So take note that most all government organizations are highly compartmentalized, and one department is separate from another, and this organization from another. And in our medical system, doctors are divided into specialties. There's the heart doctor, the kidney specialist, the brain specialist, the neurologist, the foot doctor, right? And so this concept of compartmentalizing is being mirrored in so many levels of our world and our life. And we have, like I said, this compartmentalized mind. When a person's own mind is split into compartments, their functioning becomes disjointed and out of congruence, resulting in states of cognitive dissonance. One aspect of self is not consciously connected to what the other part is feeling or needing, and contradictory behaviors result. People may feel incapable of stopping certain behavior patterns. A compartmentalized mind that operates unconsciously splits us off from our own self and interferes with its ability to integrate our full personality. We end up being driven by unconscious, unmet needs. Many people who had trauma in childhood have memory loss. They do not remember many parts of their childhood. This is an example of how the traumatized brain compartmentalizes, so that we are able to function in the world, and yet it backfires on us. So this compartmentalized often results in behaviors that work against our stated goals. For example, if my goal is to save money and avoid impulse spending, I may repeat overspending behaviors anyway and feel repeated frustration. Self-sabotaging behaviors are common outcomes. Compartmentalization is also a social manipulation strategy that leads to obfuscation of information and leaves people ignorant. When one department does not know what the other department is doing, people are left unclear of and separate from the big picture. This makes people vulnerable to misinformation and manipulation and feelings of powerlessness. We need to identify the separate parts of ourselves. In an attempt to function and survive, our mind and consciousness can become compartmentalized. Each part of self, even if it appears self-destructive, is created in an attempt to serve us, to keep us alive. Sometimes, however, destructive aspects of ourself dominate or take over too much control of our system. The result is unhappiness and a sense of being out of control of our lives. And it also results in the perpetuation of our own slavery. Our goal is to access the core self, and then from there, recognize and understand each of the different parts, promote dialogue among them, and ultimately heal and integrate the disparate parts into one cohesive, aware, and working unit. Now, not only can it be helpful to see the dialogue between our parts, but ultimately the power comes from recognizing our true core self, that divine spark where we can see and witness all the ways we've compartmentalized our mind, where we are able to be calm and clear, compassionate, to be able to see ourselves and to be able to tolerate the wounds and memories that arise as we're exploring how different parts were created within ourselves. And this part is the divine connection, our spiritual self. There's a mental health model called the internal family systems model created by Richard Schwartz, which works with this compartmentalization. And in this model, it generally identifies types of parts as exiles, which are the psychological trauma and wounds that carry the pain. The managers, which take a role of protecting the person from harm and painful emotions that really propel us to get up in the morning and go to work and, organize our lives and feel some sense of control over things. And then the firefighters, which emerge when exiles break out and demand attention. Firefighters divert the attention away from feelings of shame and express in impulsive or inappropriate behaviors, such as, overeating. They're self-destructive often, substance abuse, overwork. So ultimately, clearly, we want to heal from our traumas. This is a quote by Gabor Mate. The greatest damage done by neglect, trauma, or emotional loss is not the immediate pain they inflict, but the long-term distortions they induce in the way a developing child will continue to interpret the world and her situation in it. Unwittingly, we write the story of our future from narratives based on the past. Mindful awareness can bring into consciousness those hidden, past-based perspectives so that they no longer frame our worldview. Choice begins the moment you disidentify from the mind and its conditioned patterns. The moment you become present. Until you reach that point, you are unconscious. Healing doesn't mean the pain never existed. It means the damage no longer controls our lives. So this will include looking at our core negative beliefs, the scripts of our wounding, our behavioral patterns, our relationship patterns, and how we are triggered with overreactivity or underreactivity, and the trauma patterns that play out over and over and over. So I'm sharing here a common flyer that gets handed out and something that's shared in the world of domestic violence. It's the Wheel of Power and Control. This is from the domestic abuse intervention programs of Minnesota. It's originally from the Duluth model of power and control. And we can see that this wheel refers to relationship dynamics, typically presented as the dynamics in a dyad, in a relationship between a girlfriend and a boyfriend, between spouses, between any romantic relationship. It also could, you could see it as a relationship in all levels, from all the way up to our relationship with government, with the state. The behaviors of power and control include intimidation, emotional abuse, creating isolating a person, using minimizing, denying, or blaming to justify their own behaviors or to, gaslight a person about their reality. Often children are used because people are very protective of their children. And if their children or the safety of their children are threatened, a person will generally be more motivated to do what they're told. Economic abuse, using male privilege, and using coercion and threats. And let's contrast this, the power and control wheel, to the equality wheel, because we want to include these qualities on our vision of the ideal world. So remember back in the beginning, I said, imagine the world you want for the future, for the children of the future, and what will exist in that world. Well, we need to think about the qualities of our relationships, and an equality wheel is far preferable and will create a much better life than the power and control wheel, which we've already identified creates conditions of slavery. So what is on the equality wheel? Non-threatening behavior, non-coercive behavior, respect, trust and support between people, honesty and accountability, responsible parenting, shared responsibility for community, and shared responsibility for those aspects of our lives that we share, economic partnerships, cooperation with each other, a win-win mindset, using negotiation and fairness. Don't we all want that? I'll end this presentation on that note, that we all, if we're honest with ourselves, seek the experience of equality, of empowerment, of respect, of support, of shared responsibility, of economic partnership, fairness, to be able to use our communication skills to negotiate and find win-win outcomes. So this is possible to operate with these conditions, and we can learn how. So we'll study this more in my next part 7. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Leslie Powers. My website is AliveThrive.life, released from trauma, guided by principles, empowered by freedom. We'll see you next time. You can find me on the One Great Work Network, and also a podcast called Dissolving the Divide. And my Alive and Thriving videos can be found also on YouTube and Odyssey. Thank you very much.